The fog did not just hang, it clung, a possessive, living shroud that smothered the cypress trees and choked the moonlight. This was not the gentle mist of coastal Georgia, born of humidity and sea. This was a boundary. It was a warning. It tasted of ozone and ancient grief, and it was Alaric's oldest ally. Deep within its heart, hidden from satellite and soul, stood the manor of Blackwood Echo. To the few locals in Savannah who whispered of the hollow patch of land 20 miles out, it was a place where compasses spun and GPS signals died, a void on the map best left alone. To Lord Alaric, it was a prison, a fortress, and a tomb, all in one. He stood on the decaying grandeur of the wraparound porch, a silhouette of impossible stillness. The white paint had flaked away to gray wood decades ago, and the floorboards groaned under a mortal's weight, but they were silent beneath his. Alaric was a king, but his kingdom was one of dust motes dancing in slivers of moonlight, of portraits whose faces had faded, of memories that held far more life than his present. He had ruled legions, commanded the night, and shaped empires that had long since crumbled to sand. Now, his only subject was his daughter, Lyra. And his only duty was this: the patrol. He'd walked this perimeter for a century. He knew every root, every stone, every whisper of the wind through the Spanish moss. His boots, worn from millennia of walking but preserved by his own static nature, made no sound on the moss-slick gravel. He moved along the edge of his domain, a ghost guarding other ghosts, his senses extending beyond the physical. He was not looking for intruders. He was feeling for the taut, shimmering barrier of his will. The wards. They were old, woven with blood magic, sacrifice, and a sorrow so profound it had become a physical thing. They were the only things that kept his world hidden and Lyra safe. He had built this sanctuary after the fires in Europe, after the enlightened hunters had learned to use science as well as faith. He had fled here, to a new world, bringing the only two things he had left: his daughter and the curse of her eternal, silent childhood. That's when he felt it. Not a break, but a disturbance, a sharp, dissonant chord in the silent symphony of the night. It was not the clumsy energy of a lost teenager or a drunk hunter. It was pain, acute, raw, human pain. And it was just outside the line, 10 feet. He followed the sensation, his body moving with a predatory grace that was utterly at odds with the profound weariness in his soul. He pushed through low-hanging Spanish moss that felt like a crone's hair against his face. The unnatural fog swirled, reluctant to let him see, as if protecting him from what he was about to find. And then he found her. She was a slash of wrongness in the ancient landscape. Dumped in a shallow, muddy culvert, she looked like a broken doll. Modern clothes, dark jeans and a simple cotton shirt, not a business suit, but just as out of place here, were torn and soaked in mud and blood. Her hair, dark as the mud, was fanned out like a tragic halo. Her face was a ruin of bruises. Swollen, purple, the kind of damage that came from fists, not a fall. He knelt, his knees sinking into the damp earth. The smell of her blood was a coppery, vibrant thing, but it was tainted, soured. He felt no hunger, only a cold, familiar dread. It was not the beating that held his attention. It was the cold. Not the cold of the damp night, but a pervasive, unnatural chill that radiated from her skin, a cold that his kind knew well. It was the chill of a specific, malevolent magic. His gloves, which he wore more for the pretense of humanity than for warmth, were forgotten as he pulled one off and pressed two bare fingers against her neck. There, a pulse. A thread so fine, so fragile it was barely perceptible even to his enhanced senses. Thump. Thump. It was a drumbeat of a life guttering like a candle in a gale. This was no random act of violence. Nobody just finds this place. He scanned her body, his gaze analytical, searching. Her hands were bruised, her knuckles split. Defensive wounds. She had fought back. And then he saw it. A single, silver-black mark, no larger than a coin, stained the skin just below her ear, hidden in the bruising. It was a faint, branching pattern, like frost on a window pane. Alaric recoiled, not in fear, but in a flare of cold, ancient rage that was almost a comfort in its familiarity. He knew that mark. Wraith shade. He hadn't seen it in over a century. It was not a poison for vampires, it was a poison for humans. A signature of the Order of the Gilded Cross, the fanatic hunters who had plagued his kind for millennia. They had learned, to their fury, that a vampire could not be easily poisoned. So they had crafted this, a toxin that, when ingested by a mortal, didn't just kill. It paralyzed, it mimicked death, and it was said to anchor the soul to the body, forcing it to watch its own decay, a final, torturous insult. This changed everything. This wasn't a victim. This was bait. They had beaten this woman, beaten her to learn something perhaps, then poisoned her, and left her at the precise edge of his domain. A test, a trap, a message. We know you're here. We know what you are. Come and get her. He looked up, his senses stretching out, tasting the air. Not a sound, not a scent of another living soul. They were gone. They were disciplined. They had set their trap and retreated, confident in its terrible design. If he left her, the poison would finish its work by sunrise. Her soul would be snuffed out, and he would have to smell her decay for weeks. If he took her, he would be springing their trap, whatever it was. He would be bringing the very danger he had hidden from for a century directly into his home. And Lyra was in his home. His choice was clear. The woman must be left. The risk was incalculable. Father? The voice was as soft as moth wings, yet it cut through his resolve like a razor. Lyra stood 20 paces behind him, just inside the ward line, a small, pale figure in a white nightgown. She should not have been able to leave the house, not on her own, but she had ways. She was a creature of shadow and silence. She had been 6 years old for 300 years. Her feet, bare and pale, did not touch the ground, but hovered a hair's breadth above the moss. "She is broken," Lyra whispered, her wide, dark eyes, ancient and innocent, fixed on the woman. "Like my little bird." Alaric's dead heart clenched. He thought about Andrea, his wife, who had died of a fever in this very state, before he had been cursed. He thought about the fledgling sparrow Lyra had found last spring. He had warned her it wouldn't live. It had died in her hands, and the child who could not cry real tears had sat in the garden for a day and a night, humming a mournful tune. A small, perfect grave dug with her own pale hands. Alaric looked from his daughter, his reason for this endless, joyless existence, to the dying woman at his feet. The hunters had miscalculated. They had assumed he was a monster. They had forgotten that monsters, too, can have things they cannot bear to lose. And they had not accounted for Lyra's gentle, immovable heart. "Go back to the house, Lyra," he said, his voice a low rumble. "To your room, and bolt the door." She vanished. Not a run, but a simple receding into the shadows, as if the darkness had simply reclaimed her. Alaric turned back to the woman. The decision was made. He bent and slid his arms beneath her with a gentleness that belied his inhuman strength. She weighed almost nothing. As he lifted her, her head lolled against his chest, and a soft, unconscious whimper of pain escaped her lips. "I have you," he murmured, the words feeling foreign and rusty on his tongue. "You are safe. For now." He broke into a run, a silent, fluid motion that consumed the distance to the manor in seconds. He crossed the ward line, and the air behind him shimmered and sealed. The trap was sprung. He was committed. He bypassed the grand, decaying foyer with its shattered chandelier hanging like a crystal spider. He ignored the peeling portraits of his forgotten mortal family. He took her straight to the east wing, up the grand staircase, to a room that had not been opened in 200 years. It had been his wife's, his human wife, Andrea. The hinges screamed in protest as he forced the door. The air inside was still, suffocating with the scent of dried roses, dust, and time itself. He laid the woman gently on the four-poster bed, the ancient silks groaning and tearing under her small weight. He lit a single candle on the nightstand with a snap of his fingers, the flame casting flickering, monstrous shadows. The atrophy he'd sensed was not in her legs. It was the poison, already working on her nervous system, wasting her from the inside out. Lyra appeared in the doorway, clutching a small, threadbare stuffed rabbit with one button eye. "Is she going to sleep now, Father?" "The poison is complex, Lyra," Alaric said, shedding his long coat and tossing it onto a chair, where it landed in a cloud of dust. "She doesn't have hours. The Order's toxin is designed to be irreversible by human medicine." "Can you fix her?" Lyra's voice was small, but it held a child's simple, unshakable faith. Alaric looked at the woman's ravaged face. He could, but the cost was high. Wraith shade, once in the bloodstream, could only be drawn out, and there was only one way to draw it. He, a vampire, would have to act as a siphon. He would have to take the poison into himself. It wouldn't kill him, not in this amount, but it would weaken him. Deeply. And with the Order now knowing precisely where he was, weakness was a death sentence. He pulled a heavy, dust-covered chair to the bedside and sat. He looked at Lyra, who was now standing at the foot of the bed, rabbit clutched to her chest. "They wanted me to do this," he said, more to himself than to her. "They wanted to poison the well, to weaken the Guardian before they storm the castle." He smiled, a thin, mirthless expression that held no humor, only a chilling resolve. "Very well. Let us not disappoint them." He rolled up his sleeve, revealing a forearm as pale as marble and traced with veins that held dark, dormant blood. He took the woman's ice-cold hand in his. Her skin felt like a paper-thin sheath over brittle bones. He closed his eyes, centering his will, reaching out with his power not to take, but to give, to create a conduit. Then he made a small, precise cut on his own wrist with a sharpened fingernail. Dark, thick blood, almost black in the candlelight, welled up. He pressed the wound against the silver-black mark on her neck. He began the ritual. It was not a feeding. It was a reversal. He inhaled, a sharp, controlled breath, and instead of the sweet, metallic tang of life, he tasted ash and bitterness and silver. The poison flooded into his system, a burning, icy fire that raced up his arm and into his chest. His ancient, dead heart, which beat only once a minute, stuttered and thrashed in protest. He gritted his teeth, the muscles in his jaw standing out. The woman's body shuddered on the bed, a long, low sigh escaping her as the toxin began to recede from her veins. "Father." Lyra's voice was sharp with alarm as she saw him tremble. "I am fine," Alaric gasped, the poison making his words thick. He could feel his strength being sapped, his connection to the night, to his own power, growing dim. It was like being submerged in freezing water. The world began to tilt, his sharp senses dulling, muffled by the human-made venom. It felt like mortality. He hated it. An hour passed, then 90 minutes. He was pale, a fine sheen of cold sweat on his brow. The room spun. He felt 1,000 years old, and every one of them was a burden. But the woman? Her skin was warmer. The deathly chill had receded. The faint pulse in her neck was stronger. Thump, 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 thump. A steady, human rhythm. He pulled his wrist away, sealing the cut with a thought. He was exhausted, weaker than he had been in 1,000 years. He slumped back in the chair, his breathing ragged, his body screaming at the foreign toxin now warring with his own immortal nature. Lyra crept forward and placed the worn rabbit on the pillow beside the woman's head. "So she won't be lonely," she whispered. Alaric managed a weak nod, his eyes fixed on the woman. He had saved her from the poison. He had saved her life. But he had just doomed them all. As the first faint hints of dawn, his enemy, the betrayer, began to lighten the sky beyond the heavy curtains, the woman's eyelids fluttered. Pain. That was the first sensation. A deep, throbbing ache that lived behind her eyes and in every joint. The second was cold, but it was different now. It wasn't the soul-deep, invasive chill of the mud. It was just a room. Alara's eyelids were sandpaper. She forced them open. The world was a blur of sepia and shadow. A single flame, a candle, flickered on a distant table, casting monstrous shadows that danced on a high, ornate ceiling. She was on a bed, she registered. The mattress was soft. The sheets were impossibly fine, like silk, and they smelled of lavender and dust. Then memory, cruel and sharp, flooded in. The men, the symbol of the gilded cross on their jackets. The questions barked in her face. Where is the hollow? How do you breach the wards? The pain as they'd twisted her arm. And then, the man with the cold eyes, forcing the small silver vial to her lips, the taste of ash and metal, the cold spreading. The warden will come for you. You are our key. She jolted, a strangled cry tearing from her raw throat. But her body was a dead weight. The bruises, the torn muscles, all screamed in protest. A figure in a chair, shrouded in the deepest shadow, moved. "Please," she whispered, the word a raw croak. She tried to scramble back, but her limbs wouldn't obey. "Please, no, no more. I told you. I don't know anything. I don't know who you're looking for." She was crying now, hot, weak tears that stung the bruises on her face. The figure leaned forward, into the barest edge of the candlelight. It was a man. He was pale, impossibly pale, with a face of such sharp, aristocratic beauty that it was almost alarming. But he looked exhausted. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his breath was shallow. He was the man from the woods. His voice was not the gravelly bark of her attackers. It was a low, cultured rumble, but it was strained, as if speaking was a great effort. "They are not here." Alara blinked, the tears blurring her vision. "The men who did this to you," he clarified, his voice quiet. "They are not in this house. You are safe from them." The words didn't compute. She stared at him, at the intense, dark eyes that seemed to hold the same candlelight in their depths. Who are you?" A small sound, a rustle of cloth, came from the foot of the bed. "She's awake. Is she fixed now, Father? Alara's head whipped toward the sound. A child, a small girl, no older than 6, stood there in a simple white nightgown. She had the same dark hair as the man, the same pale skin. She was also holding the most threadbare, one-eyed rabbit Alara had ever seen. This was the detail that broke her terror. It was too surreal. A child? In this Gothic mausoleum? Her fear fractured, replaced by a profound, disorienting confusion. Where am I? She tried again, her voice a little stronger. You are at Blackwood Echo, the man said. He did not get up from his chair. He looked as if he couldn't. I found you at my border. You were dying. Blackwood Echo. The name locals gave the Hollow Patch, the place she, a folklorist, had been researching. The legend. It wasn't a lost settlement. It was his house. You live here? She whispered. In the legend? A thin, mirthless smile touched the man's lips. Legends are what men tell when they've forgotten the truth, or when the truth is too strange to be believed. He studied her, his gaze sharp and analytical. They poisoned you. Wraith Shade. Why? The name of the poison sent a fresh shiver of terror through her. They found me. My research. Father, she is cold, the little girl, Lyra, said. She stepped forward and, with a strange, gliding motion that made Alara's stomach drop, moved to the fireplace. A moment later, a fire roared to life, far too large for a child to have started so quickly. Alara ignored it. She was focused on the man. I'm a folklorist from MIT, but I was on sabbatical, tracing Gullah Geechee and regional myths. I kept hearing about this place, the Hollow Patch, the fog that eats signals. I thought it was a magnetic anomaly, or a lost community. You were wrong, he said, the words flat. I know, she said, her voice rising. I stumbled on something else. In the Savannah archives, an old shipping manifest from 1820, but it had notes in the margin. It didn't talk about ghosts. It talked about a shadow king, a warden who guarded something. It talked about an order dedicated to hunting it. The Order of the Gilded Cross. The man, Alaric, went utterly still. The air in the room grew colder. I thought it was just more folklore, Alara insisted, desperate for him to understand. A secret society myth. I was tracing their symbol, and then they found me, in my rental, the men who left me. They had the symbol, Alaric stated. It was not a question. Yes, they thought I'd found you. They thought I was a scout or a new recruit for their order. They kept asking me. God, they kept asking me how to break the wards, how to get through the fog. She was shivering violently now, the memory too real. I told them I didn't know. I thought they were crazy. And then they showed me the poison. Wraith Shade. They said it was a special key, that it would be a beacon, that the warden, the Shadow King, would be unable to resist a dying soul on his doorstep, that he would siphon the toxin to save the bait. Her eyes, wide with horror, locked onto Alaric's pale, strained face. She saw the sweat on his brow, the tremor in his hand as it rested on the chair. Oh my God, she breathed, the realization of physical blow. You did it. You saved me. And they used me to poison you. Alaric said nothing. He just watched her, his expression unreadable. But the proof was in his exhaustion, in the very weakness that kept him bound to that chair. He had taken the poison into himself to save her. He closed his eyes, a flicker of profound weariness passing over his features. They miscalculated. They assumed I am only a beast. They did not account for Lyra. At the sound of her name, Lyra glided forward, holding the stuffed rabbit. You were broken, she whispered to Alara, her voice as soft as dust. Like my bird. I told Father we had to fix you. She placed the rabbit on the bed. This is Mr. Bunny. He helped you not be lonely. Alara stared at the child, then at the man. A man who had poisoned himself to save a stranger, all because his daughter had asked. I am Alaric, he said, finally. He rose from the chair, and Alara saw the true cost. He staggered, catching himself on the bedpost. He was strong. She could sense it. But he was fighting a war inside his own veins. And this is Lyra. You will be safe here. The wards are strong. But you cannot leave. Leave? Alara almost laughed, the sound a painful bark. I can barely move. And those men are out there. Yes, Alaric said, his gaze turning to the heavily curtained window. They are. They are waiting. They know I am weakened. They will not wait long. He looked back at Alara. You need to rest. You are human. You are fragile. Heal. Because the time for answers is over. The time for survival has begun. He turned and left the room, a silent, staggering shadow, leaving her with the crackling fire, the one-eyed rabbit, and the impossible pale child. He's your father? Alara asked, her voice hoarse. Yes, Lyra said, climbing onto the foot of the bed, her movements light and unreal. He's very old and very sad. Why is he sad? Alara asked, pulling the silken sheets closer. Because of Mama, Lyra said simply, her dark eyes on the fire. And because of everything. Are you hungry? I can get you some soup. Alara nodded, her head swimming. Soup? Yes. Soup sounds normal. Thank you, Lyra. The next few days, or nights, Alara couldn't tell, as the curtains were never drawn, passed in a blur. Lyra was her attendant, bringing trays of simple human food. Bread, cheese, fruit, and yes, hot soup. Alara's bruises began to fade from purple to a sickly yellow. Her strength returned. She was trapped in this wing of the house, but she was healing. Alaric, she did not see. Lyra reported that he was meditating, trying to push the poison out. On what felt like the fourth day, Alara was strong enough to stand. The room was a museum. A woman's room. Andrea's room, Lyra had called it. She found a silver-backed hairbrush, but when she looked into the ornate standing mirror, she saw only the room behind her. Her reflection was gone. She touched the glass. It was cold. A ward. She was in a house of magic and monsters. And yet, the only monstrous thing she'd met had been human. She finally found Alaric. He was on the grand porch, standing in the gray, perpetual twilight of the fog. He looked better. The weakness was gone, replaced by that same coiled, impossible stillness. But the air around him was different. It was angry. They're here, he said, not looking at her. His voice was no longer strained. It was the rumble of an approaching storm. Alara stepped beside him, wrapping a borrowed shawl around her shoulders. She looked out. The fog was thicker than ever, a churning, gray wall. But at the very edge of it, at the invisible line, men were moving. Dozens of them. They were setting up technology. Strange tripod-mounted dishes. Floodlights that cast a weak, useless yellow against the fog. They know I'm recovered, Alaric said, his voice a low growl. Or they're impatient. They are testing, probing the wards, looking for a fracture. What do they want? To cleanse this place, he said, his lip curling in a faint sneer. To kill me, to release my daughter, and to take you back, I imagine, for failing in your mission. Elara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air. This wasn't a myth. This was a war. Suddenly, a high-pitched scream filled the air, so high it was almost beyond hearing. Elara clapped her hands over her ears, but it didn't help. The sound was a feeling. The fog boiled. The very boards of the porch beneath their feet vibrated, and the ancient wards screamed in protest. Alaric clutched the porch railing, his knuckles white. The sound was an assault on magic itself. Lyra ran out, her hands over her non-existent ears, and, for the first time, the ancient child looked truly, mortally afraid. "Father! It hurts! Make it stop!" The sonic attack was vibrating the wards, shaking the very foundation of his power. A section of the fog wall flickered, and for a terrifying second, Elara saw a man in tactical gear, his face a mask of hate. Elara, the folklorist, the researcher, watched the men. She saw their tactics. They weren't just brutes with poison. They were organized. "They're not just hunters," she said, her voice tight, shouting over the din. "They're soldiers. They're using frequency. They're trying to find a harmonic resonance, to shatter your fog, like an opera singer breaking glass." Alaric looked at her, and in his dark eyes she saw a new, sharp respect. He was an ancient king, a creature of blood and shadow. She was a modern strategist. "They think me a simple beast," Alaric snarled, as a section of the ward flickered again. "They think me a creature of claw and fang." "Good," Elara said, her voice surprisingly steady. "Let them. They've read your legend, but I've read theirs. I've seen their notes. I know how they think." He turned to her fully. The weakened man from the bedroom was gone. The king was back. "And what is it you know?" "They're methodical. They're arrogant. They're prepared for you. The monster." "They are not prepared," she said, gesturing to herself. "For the folklorist. They're not prepared for a new variable. They think I'm your weakness. But they're wrong. I'm your new weapon." The high-frequency scree was a physical thing, a needle of sound trying to pierce Alaric's skull. He staggered, one hand pressed to the temple, the other gripping the porch railing. The wards, his ancient, sorrow-woven power, were fluctuating like a dying light bulb. The fog writhed. Lyra was crumpled at the doorway, her small hands pressed over her ears, a silent scream on her face. The sound, tuned to disrupt his specific magic, was agony for her, too. "They're not jamming," Elara shouted over the din, her voice a lifeline of pure, focused logic. She had to brace herself against the vibrating wall. "They're tuning! I read their notes. They're arrogant. They believe in sonic purity. They're looking for a single harmonic frequency to shatter the wards. Like a lockpick, not a hammer." Alaric locked eyes with her. He was the warrior, the king, but this was a battle of physics. "They broadcast," he managed, the words vibrating in his chest. "Yes, which means they're wide open." Alara's mind was racing, her training as a researcher, a data sifter, taking over. "They're sending a signal out, but they have to be listening for the resonance. They're waiting for the click. What if you don't fight it?" "What?" The sound peaked, and a shower of plaster dust fell from the porch ceiling. "Don't block them. Answer them," she yelled. "They've opened a door. Can you use it? Can you send something back?" His eyes widened. A slow, terrible smile. A predator's smile touched his lips for the first time. They are Listening, he whispered, the idea taking root. They've offered me a conduit. But they're ready for your power, Alaric. They're expecting a wave of raw shadow, something to block. They're not expecting— She paused, trying to find the words. They're not expecting you, the man, not the monster, not the sadness, not the grief. Your magic is tied to this land, to your loss. It's what they called shadow sorrow in their notes. They think it's your weakness, but it's your core. He understood. He was still weak from the poison, but this was not a feat of strength. It was a feat of will. He let go of the railing and stood tall. And their tech, Ilara added, a final brilliant spark of memory. It has a feedback loop, a safety measure. They're arrogant, but not stupid. If the signal is ever corrupted or reversed, it's designed to shut down, explosively. They're trying to overload you. Overload them first. Alaric turned to the screaming, boiling fog. Lyra, he commanded, his voice now a calm, clear bell. Go to the library, the deepest room, now. Lyra vanished, the shadows pulling her away. Alaric closed his eyes. He didn't brace against the sound. He opened himself to it. He let the painful, piercing frequency find him, not as a weapon, but as a path. He felt the invisible thread of energy connecting his wards to the machine that was trying to kill him. You want my sorrow? He thought, his ancient, dead heart aching with a memory 1,000 years old. He thought of Andrea, his human wife, dying of fever. He thought of the child she gave him, the child he had to curse with his own blood to save, only to trap her in an eternal, lonely childhood. You want my grief? Take it. He pushed, not with power, but with feeling. He poured a millennium of loss, of regret, of the cold, crushing weight of immortality into that single thread of sound. The effect was instantaneous. The high-pitched scree wavered. It stumbled. It changed from a pure, technological note into a sound of profound, electronic agony. It sounded, Ilara thought, like a scream. At the edge of the ward line, the large, tripod-mounted dish glowed a sudden, angry red. The men in tactical gear shouted, their voices lost. Then, with a concussive whump, the dish exploded, sending shrapnel and a wave of superheated air back into the human attackers. The other machines, linked in a chain, followed suit, one after another, like firecrackers. And then, silence. The only sound was the crackle of the fireplace from inside the house and Ilara's own ragged breathing. It's over, she whispered, sagging against the wall, her knees weak. No, Alaric said, his eyes still fixed on the smoking, ruined camp. It's just begun. A figure emerged from the tattered fog, slow clapping. He was tall, dressed in the same black tactical gear, but his head was bare. He had a hard, fanatical face and cold blue eyes. A gleaming, silver-gilded sword was strapped to his back. "Bravo, Shadow King!" the man called out, his voice dripping with condescending scorn. "A new trick. I'm Valerius, the warden, I presume." "You presume too much," Alaric growled. Valerius stopped just feet from the shimmering, invisible ward line. He could feel its heat. His gaze fell on Ilara, and his face twisted into a mask of pure, righteous hatred. "And you," he spat, "the harlot, we gave you a mission, a key. You were meant to be the poison in his cup, and you've become his pet." "She was bait you left to die," Alaric roared, a possessive, protective rage making the air around him drop 20 degrees. "She was a tool," Valerius shouted back, "and she is human, consorting with this filth, this affront to God. You betray your own kind, woman. Alara pushed herself off the wall. She was bruised, she was weak, and she was wearing a dead woman's shawl. But she was no longer afraid. She was angry. My kind, Alara said, her voice shaking but clear. Your kind beat me, poisoned me, and left me for dead. He saved me. He poisoned himself to save me. She walked to the edge of the porch, standing beside Alaric, a broken, modern woman next to an ancient Gothic king. I read your journals, Valerius, she continued, her voice gaining strength. The ones in the Savannah archive. I know you're not just hunters. I know you're purifiers. I know what you did in Romania in '98. I know about Subject 7. I know what you did to the humans who wouldn't help you. She locked her gaze with his. You call him a monster. But he has a name. He has a daughter. All you have is a cause. And a cause is just a pretty name for an obsession. Valerius's face went crimson. Blasphemy. He drew his glowing, silver-gilded blade, a weapon humming with its own anti-magic. If the key won't work, the hammer will have to do. He lunged. But he miscalculated. He lunged at the ward line, expecting to shatter it with his blessed blade. He did not lunge at Alaric. He lunged at Alara. It was the last mistake he ever made. Alaric did not move like a man. He did not even move like a predator. He moved like a thought. One moment, he was on the porch. The next, he was in the yard, his hand locked around Valerius's throat, the glowing blade held inches from Alara's face, stopped dead. Alaric's other hand, the one not choking the life from the hunter, gripped the blade. His pale skin smoked and hissed where it touched the silver. But he did not flinch. His grip tightened, and with a crack of metal, he snapped the ancient sword in two. He threw the broken hilt to the ground and lifted Valerius 2 feet in the air. The man's legs kicked, his eyes bulging. You are wrong, Alaric whispered, his voice a sibilant hiss, his fangs, for the first time, fully descended. She is not my pet. She is my guest. And you are a trespasser. He wanted to kill him. The blood rage, the thirst for this fanatic's life, was a fire in his veins. He could feel Lyra watching from the doorway, her small face pale with terror. He could feel Alara, her hands to her mouth, watching him, seeing the real monster for the first time. He looked at Valerius, at the human, pathetic fear in the man's eyes, and the rage guttered. It died, replaced by that ancient, crushing weariness. Alaric tossed the man to the ground. Valerius landed in a heap, gasping, at the feet of his broken, smoking machines. Leave, Alaric commanded. Take your broken men, take your broken faith, and forget. He raised his hand. The fog, his old, grieving ally, surged. It moved like a living wave, enveloping the smoking camp, the terrified, injured men, and the gasping Valerius. There were muffled shouts, cries of confusion, and then silence. When the fog receded to its boundary line, they were gone. All of them. Left to wander the cypress swamps, their minds wiped, their memories of Blackwood Echo and its king replaced by a hollow, fearful void. They would be found by park rangers in the morning, babbling about a great dark fog. The siege was over. The sun, the true, mortal enemy, was just a hint of gray on the horizon. The dawn was coming. Alaric, Alara, and Lyra stood on the porch, a strange, impossible tableau. It is over, Alaric said, his fangs and his anger receding. He looked at his hand, burned and blistered from the silver. It was already healing. I can do the same for you. Alara turned to him. What? The fog, he said, gesturing. I can let you go. It can heal the memory. It can take the terror away. You can return to your life. You will wake up in a Savannah hospital. A mugging victim. You will be safe. You will be normal. Alara looked at this ancient, powerful, and profoundly sad man. She looked at Lyra, who had crept forward to tentatively, shyly, take her hand. Her small, cold fingers were a comfort. "What life, Alaric?" she said softly. "A life researching myths? I just lived one. Normal was the life where men like Valerius hunt people in the shadows. Normal was what got me left for dead in a ditch. That normal it's a lie." She tightened her grip on Lyra's hand and looked up at the Vampire King. "You said I was a variable, a new key in their plan. They were right about that. But a variable is temporary. It's time. It's time to become a constant." A flicker of hope ignited in Alaric's dark eyes. A feeling so old, he'd forgotten its name. "You will stay?" "This house needs a new coat of paint," Alara said, a small, weary smile on her face. "This library needs to be catalogued. And this family," she said, squeezing Lyra's hand, "needs a new guardian. One who understands frequency." Alaric looked at the two of them, the folklorist who had seen his monster and not fled, and the daughter who was, for the first time, smiling. The Order of the Gilded Cross, in their fanatical certainty, had seen the world in black and white. They saw human, and they saw monster. They believed humanity was a birthright, a simple biological fact of warm blood and a beating heart. But they were wrong. Alara, standing on the porch of the impossible mist-shrouded manor, finally understood the lesson. Monstrosity was not a matter of fangs or fog. It was a choice. It was the choice to dehumanize, to destroy, to see a living, breathing person as a tool, a key, or a beast. It was the cold, righteous arrogance of Valerius, who would have burned the world down to prove himself right. And humanity. Humanity was something else entirely. It was not a birthright, handed to you at your first breath. It was a choice. It was a battle, fought every single day. Or in Alaric's case, every single night, for 1,000 years. Humanity, she realized, was the choice to protect, even at great personal cost. It was a vampire, poisoned and weakened, taking in a dying stranger because his daughter asked him to. It was an ancient, grieving king, with the power to destroy his enemy, choosing instead to stop because he finally had something, someone to live for. True strength was not immortality. It was not magic. It was not the absence of fear or pain. True strength was seeing a broken, forgotten, lonely thing and choosing to fix it. It was a child, eternally 6, placing a one-eyed rabbit on a pillow. It was a folklorist facing an ancient terror and offering not fear, but a plan. It was a father learning after 1,000 years that the greatest ward against the darkness outside is not a wall of magic, but the choice to build a new light inside. As the Savannah sun finally crested the cypress trees, painting the edge of the unnatural fog in shades of brilliant, impossible gold, Alaric stood in the deep shadow of the porch, just shy of the light. But he wasn't fleeing it. He was watching it, with Ilara by his side. They were not human or monster. They were just a family. And they were, for the first time, home.